we said, how holy is this night and how blessed is this night. This is the night when Jesus rose from the dead, unnoticed by people. So while this is the night when Jesus rose from the dead, it was only in the next morning that people found out that Jesus rose from the dead. So the story of the discovery of Jesus' resurrection really happens on Sunday morning. And as Mark records it, Mark really shows how true it is that Jesus rose from the dead, how certain that is, and we can believe on this account. He starts with the story, with the words that when the Sabbath was over. Sabbath in Jewish calendar runs from Friday night to the Friday evening to Saturday evening. So when the Sabbath was over, that means it was Saturday evening. Around this time, actually before that, because it starts with the sunset. So the women, because they were not able to buy anything on Saturday night, on the Sabbath, which is the rest day, they went to buy something. It says Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they could go and anoint Jesus' dead body. These are the women who were standing and watching Jesus' death on the cross. And at least two of these people also watched Jesus being buried. So they were very faithful to Jesus even to the end. When even the 12 apostles were not so close to Jesus at Jesus' death, these women were. So we can just see how there are people, not just apostles, who are very faithful to Jesus, who are not leaders of the church, but they were faithful. And indeed, Christian history is about these people, lay people. While we affirm that apostles are really foundation of the church, and even now the bishops and priests are leading the church, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that they are more holier than others necessarily. There are many lay people who are doing just wonderful work for Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they came to the tomb. So they bought these perfumes on Saturday night, but they couldn't, spices on the Saturday night, but they couldn't go at night because it's dark, and the grave at the time, tomb was on the rock, actually closed with rock, and just inside the rock. So they really cannot go there at night. Actually, even now, you don't really want to go to graves at night, the cemeteries at night. So they had to wait for early Sunday morning. So that's why actually we have service on Sunday morning, because that's the time that the good news of Jesus' resurrection was proclaimed. So that's really the reason why Christians moved instead of Sabbath, the Sunday morning, especially morning, as a worship time. And they were saying to each other, "Who's going to roll the stone from the entrance for us?" The stone was big. It's not like this stone, so it's too heavy for even 3 women to roll off. Probably needs very strong 2 men at least. So they are just wondering, how is it going to happen? Yeah, we bought these spices, but how can we use this? And this really sets the stage for the first evidence that of Jesus' resurrection that is going to be talked about in this gospel. Because it says, when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, and it was a very large stone. So saying it is a very large stone, it means that probably more than 2 possibly people would have just worked on this. And it is impossible, because they probably checked the place on Saturday afternoon, and the tomb was there in intact form. And they came on Sunday morning, and the stone was gone. Cannot be that somebody really came at night and moved the stone. For what purpose? So this moved stone is the first evidence that Jesus is risen from the dead. And going into the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe seated on the right side. So there's an angel there. It doesn't say that it is an angel, but white-robed person that they don't recognize. What business does he have in the tomb? It must be an angel. And they were startled. Why wouldn't they be? To see a stone which is used as a gate of the tomb moved, and they go into the tomb and only see a white man that they don't recognize at all. So the man is not in Jesus' circle. So who is this man doing here? And the man announces. But he said, white-robed man, I mean. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised." So this is the evidence, number 2. The angel announced it. If this man is an angel, and must be, would angel may lie about this? No. He announced that Jesus is risen. So this is the evidence that Jesus is indeed risen. And he says, "He isn't here. Look, here is the place where they laid him." And this is the third evidence, the empty grave. There was nobody there. In the place that they laid Jesus, there was nobody there. Well, there are actually grave diggers throughout the ages. But grave diggers really steal things, precious things that are buried with person. They don't steal a person, the body. It's nonsense. Why would somebody steal a body? But there was no one there. There was no body in the grave. So how can you explain this except that Jesus is risen? And the angel continues to speak. "Go tell his disciples, especially Peter." Well, this is interesting. They asked to tell Jesus' disciples that Jesus is risen when they haven't seen that. Just based on the words of the angel and based on the evidence of the rolled stone and also the empty grave. So they have to tell the apostles, the great disciples of Jesus, what they haven't proved yet, or they haven't seen with their own eyes. In other words, they have to believe first in order to tell this. They have to believe the words of the angel and tell the disciples. And this angel is specially named Peter because Peter denied Jesus before Jesus died. So by calling name of the Peter, the angel is saying, Jesus has forgiven Peter. He will be seen to Peter as well. And this is what they are to tell the disciples, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you. So now, if the women's job is quite difficult thing, that they have to believe on the words of the angels and tell the disciples job is even more difficult. Because they have to they haven't even seen the angel or empty grave, but they have to believe the words of these women, and go to Galilee to see Jesus. So Jesus is really demanding the disciples just to believe on the basis of evidence. And there's one more evidence here, because it says, you will see him there just as he told you. The fourth evidence is that Jesus had foretold this before he died, when he was alive, or he's now alive again, but he told this when he was with disciples. He had foretold that he will die and rise again. So Jesus' own words is another evidence that Jesus is indeed risen. So this is evidence number 4. And overcame with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Well, it is clear that they spoke to the disciples at the end. So this is talking about their initial reaction. They said nothing to anyone at the beginning because they were so afraid. And they even used the word they fled the tomb. They just saw the angel and so horrified that they just couldn't really stay there. They just fled and didn't say anything for a while. Actually, some evidence, there's a strong evidence, actually, they said to the disciples, because first of all, the disciples went there and other gospels and everything. But the one thing is that the readers of this gospel knew that the women spoke. Because Mark writes this gospel to the Roman believers in the city of Rome. And the readers, because they heard the news, of course, that Jesus is risen, they know, okay, the first witnesses must have told somebody so that this might come to us. So this is the evidence number 5, that they spoke out at the end, although they were afraid at the beginning. Well, they were very afraid at the beginning because they couldn't believe. See, many people in our days say, as if that we are very different from the people of the old, say, oh, okay, people back then could believe in the resurrection because the science wasn't developed. Well, how much science do you need to understand that people usually don't rise from the dead? Anybody, even the child knows that. They know that if somebody dies, that is permanent. So it's not a matter of science. People couldn't believe that then either. The women were afraid at the time when they heard this. But they believed at the end because the evidence was so strong. I said actually they must have told others, but if you read on in the later part of Mark, then it is recorded that they said to others. The problem is how Mark's gospel ends is quite uncertain because different manuscripts have different endings. And some manuscripts just end the gospel right here at the end, just saying because they were afraid is the last part of the whole gospel. And many people will think that, oh, this cannot be read the ending. It just finishes so abruptly. But I think that it can be a perfect ending. Because what Mark is saying is that I have presented all the evidence that Jesus is risen. Now you have to make a decision about this, whether you believe it or not. It is quite interesting that no human saw Jesus rising from the dead. He just rose sometime in the middle of the night. We don't know what time exactly because nobody saw it. They only discovered that Jesus was risen in the next morning. And they had to rely on the evidences to believe in that. So that means the apostles are no better than us in our positions because they just relied on the evidence and believed it. It's not as if that if I see Jesus risen, I'll believe it, because the apostles didn't do that either. And that's probably why Jesus didn't show his resurrection to anybody. So the people will believe on the evidence and the words of angels. So we are in the same boat as the apostles, but we are better off, actually, than apostles. Because the apostles had to just believe in the words of these women and believe, but they later saw Jesus themselves at the end. So when they first believed, they had confirmation. But we have one more evidence number 6. That is, that we have the words of these apostles and the women who later saw Jesus themselves. So we have the witnesses. apostles believed only in the words of angels that was passed down to women and so on. But we actually have witnesses, words of witnesses, who saw the risen Jesus, the apostles and many others, of which we will read more about tomorrow morning. So we have even better witness, better evidences than what prompted apostles to believe. So is there a reason why we should believe in Jesus' resurrection? Jesus really rose from the dead. All the accounts really adds up to that. And this is our faith. When we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, our lives change. When we believe that, we will get more and more confirmation that Jesus indeed is guiding us as He is risen. So let us hold on to this faith, because this is our hope. Because only when we know that Jesus is risen, we know that we will reign with Him forever. We will rise with Him from the dead on the last day. So, this is the message of Easter. Jesus is risen from the dead. Hallelujah. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.